Here we go live there on our screen now. That's Matthew on the right-hand side. That's me, Steve Goody, sitting in the middle there. And on the left-hand side, we have David Windler, who's the financial specialist, who's our favourite broker for the Mortgage Supply Company. Can you hear us okay there, Dave?
Certainly can, Steve. Good evening, Steve. Matthew, good evening, everyone.
Thanks, mate. Great to have you. I'm sort of going to lay down, I suppose, a bit of an agenda for this evening. I'm essentially going to MC. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trawl through your questions. So if you have anything that's sort of burning as a question in your mind and you want to ask either David Windler or Matt Gilligan this evening, type it into the questions panel there, and I will trawl through them. And when I see 2 or 3 people asking the same question, or a nice, excellently curly one, which I think will stump one of our 2 experts this evening, I'm going to throw it at them at an opportune moment and see if we can trip them up. But before we do that, Matt Gilligan's got a short presentation, basically, I suppose, outlining the changes that have occurred in the last couple of weeks, and we're going to try and analyse what the changes are, how they affect us as property investors, and maybe even get into the side of where are the advantages in this, where's the good news, how's this going to move the market, but also with Matthew being taxes and entities and structures expert accountant for property investing in New Zealand, also how to keep ourselves safe and make sure we're on the right side of these new rules. Would that about cover it, Matthew?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it pretty simple, Steve. I think I'll just limit it to the rule changes and what's happened and implications for investors and things we need to be thinking about. And I'll also cover the LVR rules, and then we'll direct questions to David and I at the end. So
Magic.
That about covers it.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's roll into it.
Thank you. Right. Well, good evening, everybody. Matthew Gilligan speaking. This evening, I'm going to be giving some generic advice to you all. Please don't assume that this is specific advice. Steve, can you just make me presenter? Thank you. Please don't anybody take this as specific advice. I'm relying on the exemptions available to chartered accountants under the Financial Advisors Act 2008, Section 14. If you do have specific questions about tax or finance, then feel free to... Steve, I've just lost my screen. Excuse me, everybody.
Okay.
This is not my finest moment.
That's all right.
I can chuck my slide. So as I was saying, I don't intend to give specific advice to anybody. It's just generic advice, and my intention is to keep it generic. If you do need some help, we can give you individual advice on a one-to-one basis. I can bring mine up if you wish.
Sorry about that. Sorry, folks. This is the trials and tremors of doing a webinar from multiple locations with multiple people all over the show. So please bear with us for a moment.
David, have you had many questions on LVRs? Has your phone been going berserk? David's just...
Yeah, plenty of questions at the moment around the LVR rules and the impact that they will have on borrowers. I think the real surprise for us is that they came in all of a sudden and came in pretty quickly without much in the way of consultation with our banks. Speaking to Westpac today, they knew about as much as everybody else did prior to the announcement. So it came in quick and almost on the fly, and I think they're leaving it to between now and October 1 to go through whatever consultation and implementation process that they might go through. Caught the banks by surprise.
Yes, absolutely, because it wasn't the banks had that consultation and it just got thrown upon them. Right.
Yeah, and they'll try and work their way around it, I'm sure.
Yes. How are we going there, Steve?
Yeah, good. It looks like I'm going to have to do the progressing of the slides from this side, I'm afraid, so let's just work with it from there.
Okay, there you go. So just as a starting point, I'll start with the capital gains tax review. The not capital gains tax is, as it's been introduced by the politicians and it's somewhat puzzling to me that a tax that applies to a property that was purchased with the intention for long-term investment that was previously not taxable if it was sold within 10 years, within 2 years as a change of intention, is now taxable, but it's not a capital gains tax. To me, this is a capital gains tax. They call it a bright line test, which is another name for it. Please progress, Steve. And essentially, it is not region specific. It's taxing gains on property sold within 2 years of purchase. It applies from the 1st of October 2015 on properties acquired after that date and then sold after that date. I think it's important to understand that the legislation is not due until August. There's a consultation document coming out in July. The legislation will come in August. And the devil will be in that detail. I recall when the look-through company rules came in, what was signalled as policy and what we ended up with were quite different animals. So it won't surprise me at all if we see further developments surrounding these rules as the changes come through. There you go. So it's a bright line test, which is a 2-year test. You've got home, your inheritance, and properties disposed of as a result of relationship property settlements are not affected. And keep clicking, Steve. And essentially all it's doing is implying an intention of sold within 2 years. So, there's otherwise, even if you've acquired the property for long-term investment and it's a buy and hold investment, the IRD is saying, well, the intention test is too hard to enforce because anybody can say, I bought it with long-term investment purposes, I've changed my mind because the neighbour had turned out to be rough or the yields didn't suit my purpose, so hand on my heart, I've only owned the property for a week or a month, but I've changed my mind, and that's non-taxable based on our current intention tests. And IRD's only defence to that really is to say, well, here's a pattern of activities, or to talk to your mortgage broker, your banker, your lawyer, and so forth, and see if they can catch you out as a taxpayer admitting that you have an intention to sell. Then, of course, it becomes taxable. So it's tough for the IRD to prove, and there's an awful lot of property that gets bought and sold within 2 years, and tax would otherwise be payable, but the taxpayer doesn't admit they had the intention to sell it. So this just gets rid of all of that, washes it away, and makes those properties taxable sold within 2 years. Now, if you do intend to sell, of course, your property is taxable for life. So it doesn't matter, these rules are not going to change anything surrounding, the long-term intention to sell property. That's still going to be taxable, and the tainting rules, of course, related to people in the business of buying and selling and buying and holding property will also still apply. So nothing's changed in that regard. Next slide, please. So some questions that we've had asked about this. What about a capital loss within 2 years? So what happens if you buy a property, $750,000, you end up selling it earlier than you expect, and you make a capital gain on the property? Is that property, in fact, going to be, if you make a loss, are you going to be able to deduct that loss? So what was previously projected to be a gain, if it's suddenly a loss within the 2 years, do you get to deduct that and carry that forward and offset it against other capital gains or other losses? So that's an element that's very unclear, and that'll come out in the legislation. What about moving assets to related parties? For instance, one of the common things we do with a client when we meet them is we identify they don't have asset protection, or maybe they're not very tax efficient with the way they're owning their properties. So we seek to shift the properties from perhaps an individual to a look-through company or to a trust, and correct what is a mistake within their structure because they purchased the property in the wrong entity. And these rules will probably catch that if there's any gain on value and tax it. So it'll be interesting to see what they say about that. Also, what about properties acquired and sold after 2 years and 1 day? Will a property acquired and sold within 2 years and 1 day be caught by some sort of anti-avoidance provision? what are they going to do to stop people, for example, selling properties between related parties? So David buys a property for 500,000, it's suddenly worth 800. Steve's got a property that he's purchased for 500 with 800. What's to stop them selling them to each other for 400? Suddenly you've got a loss, and is that going to be deductible? And the fact that they might know each other and they're trying to jack that up, is there some sort of anti-avoidance provision that's going to apply to that? So the devil will be in the detail, and I'm sure there'll be answers to these questions, but these are some questions that we've had and clients of ours have been asking. These rules have a big focus on non-residents, and rightly so. I mean, the number of times we see non-residents skirting around the edges of our client base, asking us questions, and you can see that they've got no intention of paying any tax whatsoever, and they're just clarifying bits and pieces surrounding the framework of being in New Zealand. Things like foreign investors here, they put one property in their mother's name, one in their sister's name, one in their brother's name. We see that a lot. In my book, Tax Structures 101, I specifically wrote that up and said IRD will catch you if you're doing this, don't do this. It's very common. And the government's reacting, they know this, they're reacting by requiring non-residents to have an IRD number and a bank account number. The bank account number, of course, due to the money laundering legislation, requires a fairly exact process to track and trace where these people are from. And that will help IRD trace them if they need to. And the New Zealand IRD number and the foreign tax filing number are also required, so you've got to supply both. There's also talk of a withholding tax requirement, kind of similar to what they do in the States. I know I bought property in the States, and when you sell a property up there, you've got to withhold tax and pay it to the federal government, and then file a tax return to get that refunded to you, and prove that you didn't make money, or if you did make money, they just keep it. And I think that's smart too, because a lot of these people disappear into the abyss without paying tax. And when they buy and sell a property, that withholding tax will apply and stop that happening. So that's smart. Next slide, please. Just a comment on IRD funding. Since 2010, the IRD have been provided 33 million for property tax compliance. Rough numbers, 258 million of revenue has been generated, roughly 7.8 to 1 as a return. So that's an impressive statistic. An extra 29 million has been provided in this budget, and that's been allocated to the audit of property investors and the so-called black economy, particularly focused on tradesmen and restaurateurs and the like. And we have seen in the last 5 years with the 33 million that's been allocated, a lot more audit activity and some pretty aggressive tactics. IRD hiring private investigators to talk to tradesmen and make interviews and offer them cash. IRD getting into restaurateurs' Facebook pages, finding past employees on Facebook that are friends with current employees, and interviewing them to get their names and see if they are on the PAYE records. IRD observing the cash take of restaurateurs and reconciling it to the records when they audit them. This sort of stuff, very aggressive. They're using the money to really clamp down. So the budgeted return on the extra 29 million is 7 to 1 or 420 million. I doubt they'll continue to get the same return on money spent, because I think they'll pretty quickly pick the low-hanging fruit. Steve, one of the common questions I get is, who do IRD actually look at? And fairly much they have statistical auditing programs that look at things like the Land Transfer Office and look for 3 or more titles appearing in a taxpayer's name.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got 3 or more properties in a short time frame, say 3-5 years, they're more likely to look at you. They get a big list of people and say, gosh, this person's had 5 properties in 5 years. We should have a look at this person. So then off the land transfer record, they've got a process of trying to identify what the IRD number of that taxpayer is, and then they go through and audit them and see whether they've returned it as revenue or capital accounts. But I think they're working their way through those people pretty quickly, and that was in that 258 million they got. I don't know if they'll continue at the same pace. Next slide, please.
It seems like they probably should. It's a pretty good return for them, let's face it.
It is, yeah. So just the tail end of that slide, property investors and tradesmen and restaurateurs, anybody in the cash economy should expect to visit. And we've certainly been saying to our trade and restaurateur clients, pull your stocks up and make sure you're doing the right thing. So just a high level on the budget. I think most of this was, most of the good stuff was leaked. So we've had some modest tax cuts forecast for 2017. What a surprise, it's an election year. There's a budget surplus forecast for 2016. GDP, they're saying, is going to be 3% for the next 4 years, which is, I would think, probably fair enough with the farm cycle where it's at in a quite recessionary rural economy. Interesting to see unemployment going under 5%. That is rockstar economy stuff. You know, the rest of the world's so recessionary and we're booming. And I'm already feeling that at GRA, getting staff is really difficult in Auckland at the moment. The economy's busy, and getting a builder, getting anything is tough up here. On the supply side, with Auckland's housing supply being so tight, a public-private partnership has been announced. There's some 500 hectares of Crown land in the Auckland region, and there's that land and $52 million has been allocated to rapidly bring the supply of that in a public-private partnership model with private developers. And it's forecast to bring 4,500 to 10,000 houses into the market on Crown land. Currently, there's estimated to be a 20,000 house supply deficit in Auckland. So that obviously will help, but there's an awful lot of way to go before the Auckland market has its supply and balance made up, that's for sure. So I don't see that reducing house prices. I just think that's a healthy thing to help control rents and house price inflation.
Certainly with supply and demand the way that it is, though, Matt, you can, and the amount of immigration coming into Auckland versus the number of properties they're building, and even the number of properties that they're projecting that they're going to build, they're not going to correct that supply-demand issue in our lifetime, are they, realistically?
They'll get there, but there's just a big lead time to fix this problem. Auckland's services network of stormwater, sewage, transport and infrastructure, all of it has been so underfunded and undersupplied. We've had 7 territorial authorities up here amalgamated into a single super city, and which is a very political thing, but you know, that super city has got a common vision under the Auckland Strategic Plan. That Auckland Strategic Plan has set down under the Auckland Unitary Plan the new rules for intensification, and they say that 70% of the growth of Auckland will be within the existing urban footprint. And what does that mean? That means you've got to dig up all the roads and make the pipes bigger, because you can't flush the toilet of 70% of the increase in the Auckland's population growth down the existing pipes. You have to make them bigger. So we've got this massive lag in services. There's already a lot of areas of Auckland that are red zoned. You can't, even though the land's there, you can't develop them because the infrastructure can't support it. So the lead time for that is, it's not a fast thing. It's 5 to 10 years. It's not just a matter of saying, hey, we're rezoning that land. You can now build, 1,000 houses on that 50 hectares. You can't do that. You've got to put services. And of course, our special housing authority legislation is helping speed up the zoning, but that doesn't put pipes in the ground. So it will be a long lead in.
Yeah, you've got net migrations, hit another record for April. It's nine months in a row that the net migration record year on year has been broken. I don't think we're going to see that change anytime soon. I mean, in my view, Auckland's gone from being a baby city to a teenage city very, very quickly, and it's going through some growing pains.
I don't I don't see the net migrations changing the story either, because if you took all the net migration out, 2/3, 66% of Auckland's population growth is actually net births and deaths. So, okay, this year we've got a large amount of net migration in last year coming in, which is kind of the cherry on top from an investor's perspective. But the long run statistic is 2/3 of our demand is organic growth from net births and deaths. So that de-risks Auckland's demand story. We have bulletproof demand. So really very good place to have your money. And that's why I spent the GFC saying to our client base, hey, get out of the regions and stay in the main centres because they're more shockproof. But you can't ignore Auckland's supply problem. Get your money into Auckland.
Yeah, you've been saying that for years and years, and you're right. So, do you see this price level in Auckland correcting anytime soon? Then, that's the big question, isn't it?
Well, Steve, I spent the last 18 months writing Property 101, and so I've been thinking about these things quite deeply and reading about them a lot. And one of my chapters is on property bubbles. And a property bubble is a reduction of house price value of more than 20%. Anecdotally, that's kind of the generally accepted position. And what causes housing markets to devalue rapidly is primarily either a reduction of credit supply, so massive hike in interest rates or the banking industry tipping over, or a major exodus of population. And we last had a proper crash of 40% in 1974. Between 74 and 81, New Zealand house prices fell an average of just over 40%. And that's a proper crash. There was a bubble implosion. And that was because 350,000 people left New Zealand between 1974 and 1981. These are in the Muldoon years. High interest rates, carless days, a regulated exchange rate, all this sort of stuff. And it was just a tough place to live, and the population got fed up and left. A lot of the Poms that arrived here migrated across to Australia. So that was a major crash. But these days we have a very fiscally responsible Reserve Bank, and it's very much aware of housing bubbles, and it's doing everything it can to make our housing market shockproof and to slow the Auckland growth down to stop the downside of what would come from an international credit shock to the New Zealand credit environment. And fair play to them. The 20% LVR rules that went in, now the 30% LVR rules, which we'll talk about in a minute, that stuff is making New Zealand and particularly Auckland more shockproof. Just look at Auckland since those rules have come in. It's up over 20% since 2013 when those rules came in. And so you've had all of the growth in the market plus the 20% deposit. So everybody that's invested prior to that has had growth, which is protecting them. And anybody that's invested after that have had an amount of at least 20% as a deposit plus the growth in the market. So I think it's making Auckland pretty shockproof.
Yeah, but to be fair, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because it has happened once before. But the Reserve Bank, their job isn't specifically to take the heat out of the Auckland property market, is it? Their job is to protect the banking system in New Zealand.
That's right.
So what they're doing is strengthening the banking system without actually intentionally targeting Auckland house prices and trying to lower them.
Well, the Reserve Bank's job is to manage the money supply in the financial markets so that we maintain stability.
Yep.
And if the Auckland housing market ends up with a housing bubble that pops and we have a significant correction, that's obviously very unhealthy for the whole country. Secondly, where the housing market is distorting investment, taking investment away from business and research and development and the supply of capital, it's distorting the supply of capital available to the stock market and so forth. That's not a healthy thing. To the extent that it pushes our exchange rate around because of the effect on interest rates, and you end up with distortion. So that is their role, to manage that stuff, and that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I suppose.
So, yeah. So next slide, please. So there's no shocks in this budget. I think that everything's been leaked. So let's talk about the next bit of leaked content, which is LVR rules. Keep going. So a bit of lending lingo. Obviously, LVR means loan to value ratio. And this is the ratio between loan and market value. You divide debt into the market value. So if you have an $80,000, an 80% LVR, that means you've got a 20% deposit. So the other side of the lingo that you will have seen being discussed is the speed limit. And what the speed limit is it's the amount of lending that may exceed the LVR restrictions. So from 2013 going into 2014, 10% of lending could exceed the 80% LVR limit across New Zealand. And which means, if you wanted a 100% loan, you could get it if the bank wanted to give it to you, but they weren't allowed to do more than 10% of that type of lending. Next slide. So the Reserve Bank policy changes that are coming into effect from 1 October 2015, and they affect Auckland residential property investors, Auckland council area only, and you need to put a 30% deposit on property because the new LVR rule is 70% within the Auckland region. And the speed limit of non-compliant lending is maintained at 10%. Now, for the rest of New Zealand, no change to the LVR. It's been maintained at 80%, but the speed limit of non-compliant lending has been increased to 15%. This, of course, means increase of money supply to the rest of New Zealand because you get more leverage at 80%, and 15% of the loans can be over the 80% mark, up to 100% if the bank wants to do it.
Mm.
So that is great news for rural New Zealand that's having a hard time. They're on a tough part of the farm cycle with commodity prices and milk fat being so soft, and that should see capital disappearing out of Auckland, seeking the higher gearing ratio in smaller towns and smaller centres across the country.
Well, it's great news, I suppose, as well for the fact that cash flow has been difficult to find in the Auckland marketplace because values have moved so much. And a lot of places outside of the Auckland metropolitan area have, pretty decent cash flow. And if you're an investor in Auckland, you've probably got the 30% required to buy your next house, but possibly not the one after that, if that makes sense as well. Would that be the way you would see it as well?
No.
Just tell me how I'm wrong then,
I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about small town investing.
I'm not talking small town. I'm saying that there's stuff below the Bombay Hills that's not rural. There's some towns around there, Christchurch, Wellington. There's more than 3 or 4 people living in these places. Matthew.
Yes. Okay. So for me, for my clients, what I want them to do is stick to the main centres that have a high cost base. And I don't think you've heard me talk about this before, Steve, so I'll just explore it for a minute. Let's take 2 property investments. One in Wellington for $400,000, growing at 6%. And one in Rotorua for $100,000, growing at 6%. And you would think, okay, so they've both got 6% growth rates. They're both going to be equal. But they won't be. Because the thing is, it's going to cost you 25 grand, give or take a few dollars, to maintain the house in Wellington or the house in Rotorua. They're houses. And over 10, 15 years, you're going to have to do a kitchen, a bathroom, a roof, recarpet, maybe carpet sort of annual maintenance. You do that through your annual budgets. But you get this long-term deferred maintenance. You just have to repile the house. You have to reclad it. You re-roof it. That stuff I find is about 25 grand over 15 years. Now, at 6% on a $100,000 cost base in Rotorua, you've got 60 grand over 10 years. And if you get copped with 25,000 of maintenance over the 10 years, 25 over 60 is, a fair chunk, 40% of your growth going to maintenance. But the same property in Wellington, over 10 years, 6% of 240 times 10, 6% of 400 times 10, that's 240,000. So you've got 240,000 of maintenance, of capital growth to pay the same 25 grand. So it's actually, just over 10% of your capital growth going to pay your capital maintenance, whereas in Rotorua, you're paying 40% of your capital growth to your maintenance. So I don't think it's right to say that areas are equal because they have the same capital growth rates. The cost base distorts the return. The same applies to the revenue return on those properties. You get a $200 a week in Rotorua, looks like a good deal, but it costs $6 grand in rates, insurance, repairs and maintenance and management fees in Rotorua and Wellington on average. So your 10,000 of gross rent turns into 4,000 net yield. Over 100 grand, you're only getting 4%. The gross yields look high, the net yields look low. Not true on an asset with a high cost base in Upper Hutt or Lower Hutt or one of the investor areas in Wellington or Auckland.
Yeah, but that's just the danger of chasing purely cash flow without any commercial reality. And I think this is what Windler and I were talking about before we came online. And Dave, you were saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're starting to see investors starting to look at the Invercargills and the Tokeroas again, and you're raising your eyebrows.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think most of us who are around through the global financial crisis remember Tokeroa. Went up very, very quickly and came down just as fast. And so, seeing sort of Auckland investors hopping in the car and taking a drive sort of within a couple of hours, I think personally they'd be probably better off getting on a plane and spending the same amount of time popping down to the next biggest city and obviously the seat of government. There's got to be some good value possibly in Wellington these days.
Yep. No,
yeah,
absolutely.
I reckon just go for an asset with a high cost base would be a better shape. Because it's not the town or the region, it's the cost base of the asset. So if you're in Rotorua and you bought a $400,000 house with a net yield of 6%, that house is going to be more shockproof because it's still only 25 grand to maintain it. But the thing is, the average house price of Rotorua is not going to produce that. So that's why you need to go to the bigger centres.
And also, I think it comes down to buyer pool as well. At some point, you're going to want to realise the asset by selling it to somebody else. And how big is the pool of people that are likely to purchase it off you? If you're doing your Tokeroa is a bit of an extreme example, but if you're doing your smaller town investing, you've really got to plan it beautifully so that you're actually selling or disinvesting in that asset in an upturn, because otherwise, you're going to take a pasting.
It's a liquid, that's right. The smaller towns are much more volatile. They're harder to bank in the down market. The banks know they're more volatile, so they won't need money. So you're dead right, you have to exit during the buoyant times, which you can do at the moment. This is the best time to sell things you don't want in your portfolio.
So what you're basically saying is that Auckland is still the centre of your universe, but there is a heartbeat outside of Auckland slightly. You can give me that at least.
Begrudgingly, I'd say there's stuff outside of Auckland.
Okay. Well, let's just leave it at that and try not to mention the rugby at all. Okay, let's just leave it alone. Don't anybody bring up the rugby. Okay. So moving on, with these speed bumps, correct me, Dave. Is there any change to the bank's emphasis on serviceability? Are they looking at these speed bumps and adjusting servicing at all in regard to how people borrow money?
I think income's been the key calculation, since the global financial crisis. Banks got away with lending on a heartbeat through those times and learned a valuable lesson. So income is king. How it's treated by banks. You put income calculations into 8 different bank calculators and you will get 8 different answers. We're certainly doing a lot with the smaller New Zealand lenders, the likes of TSB and the old Southland Building Society, SBS Bank, and getting a lot more bang for our buck from those providers compared to the bigger players who are a little harsher in their calculations.
Okay, but I mean, have those calculations changed based on these new rules at all?
No, those calculations have stayed. They've stayed pretty much the same, and have been probably for around about the last 2 years. The maths has been pretty similar.
Yep. Okay. Great. All right, Matt, back over to you.
All right. So these rules exempt family homes, new builds, and holiday homes. So I imagine when most people go to the bank, they will not be admitting that they rent their holiday home, or they'll be caught by these rules.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, new builds as an exemption is useful. I think that's an area of huge interest to a lot of people in Auckland, just with the Auckland Unitary Plan coming in. A lot of properties are being rezoned, so it's quite easy to find land that's going to be available next year to build on, and you'll be able to breach these LVR rules with it. So there's opportunity there. Next slide, please.
I've got a quick question here that actually relates to that as well. If we bought a rental property and the tenants are our extended family, siblings, parents, whatever, and we decide to sell it within 2 years, are we likely to be caught with this issue, like paying tax on it?
Yep. The intention is you've got an investment property. It doesn't matter who the tenants are. It's an investment property. If you sell it within 2 years, you'll be caught by this bright line test.
Yeah, fair call. All right, thanks.
So it's Reserve Bank commentary that on the impact of these rules is that house price growth will reduce by 2 to 4%. Lord knows how they model that. They believe that sales volumes will decrease by 8 to 10% in Auckland, and they're particularly focused on tracking information from non-resident buying, which is a big thrust of this.
Mm-hmm.
And we were also talking offline, Steve, and with David, that we all share the view that sales volumes will get a bit of a shock. I definitely think that you'll see a slowdown because people tend to get a little bit concerned about tax changes and changes to the credit supply, and that happened in 2013 during the election and the LVR rule changes coming in. Everybody got very fearful, and suddenly sales volumes dropped away, but they came back very, very powerfully once the market digested the information. So it won't surprise me at all if we see people being a little bit concerned, but perhaps less so than last time because they understand these rules now and they've seen the market bounce back.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But don't you also get a wave effect as well? You get people holding off making that purchase that they really want to make, and it builds up a resistance, if you like. And as soon as they get used to it, they sort of come back in mass. And I think we saw that when the first round of the rules came in as well, didn't we? Pent-up demand.
Yep. I mean, the thing is, nothing's changed. There's still a heap of migrants coming here. The population's still breeding. Supply is tight. The credit markets still don't have a functioning second-tier finance market to supply credit to builders and property developers. So they're all starving for capital post the GFC. Tight supply, no services in the ground. Auckland Unitary Plan rules not in place. I'm speaking of Auckland, of course. So all of that is still a factor, and now you shock the market with LVR changes. But the real problem is we don't have land and services in the ground. If we did, it would all be developed and you'd have supply on tap and these problems would go away.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You can shock the market all you like. It's not changing the underlying problem, which is supply.
Yeah, because I mean, this is where I've got it. I got asked a question the other day in a similar webinar to this. A property, a 2-bedroom semi-detached unit that's been renovated in Mangere sells for $770,000 with 34 bidders at auction. How can that get that out of whack? How can properties be selling for that extreme a price point and every single backyard in Auckland not be being built on? And the problem is, it's not supply demand purely. It's a whole pile of other factors as well, which make it impossible to build these new homes.
Yeah, it's a long lead in to get supply in there. I mean, if you want anomalies, look at Clendon. Clendon's got 2 prisons in it. It's a pretty rough suburb, and houses were 180 to 220 grand in the middle of the GFC down in there. Buying wholesale. That's what the property tutors boys were buying at down in there. And now they're all over 400. And what's changed? Well, they're putting a 3rd prison there. So, that speaks to what's happening in Auckland. I've got a house I bought in the middle of the GFC for 180,000. It's turned out to be a real maintenance problem, and I've had no end of trouble with it. It's in Mangere. I stuck it on the market on Tuesday for $395, and it sold on Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing some crazy things, and I mean, I know what you made about the prisons, and I mean, there's 4 of them there if you consider Westfield one of them. But I mean, the flip side of that too is I was wandering around Sean Wood's Property Masters event in Auckland and hearing these random conversations. And some of the conversations you hear out in the crew room where all of his clients are having, everything's a property conversation and those things. And one of the conversations I heard was, how did he get it so cheap? Good 4-bedroom for only $475,000 in that suburb. And the reply was, oh, it didn't have a roof. You know what I mean? And then you hear snippets. It's like conversations you hear in lifts, and you hear the snippet of a conversation. Oh, he's buying in South Auckland, and when they say the word South twice, I sort of interjected and go, well, how's that different to South Auckland? What's a double South? And he goes, oh, South Auckland, Huntly. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? That's obscene. Give me a break. So they're buying 3-bedroom houses in Huntly for $350,000 and $400,000 because it's considered now a suburb of Auckland. I mean, come on. That's starting to get a bit ridiculous.
Well, 7 territorial authorities mismanaging the supply of services and land, unable to get a cohesive plan. Now you've got a super city. They are definitely nailing it. They are working supply. And there's a big change of attitude in council. I'm dealing with them. They're much better to deal with, but it just takes time. And when I say takes time, it's 5 to 10 years to fix this at the minimum.
Yeah, minimum. It's not going to be something that's, as I say, it's going to be fixed anytime soon at all. And it's not only mismanagement. They've been handed this piece of dirt, which is essentially reclaimed swampland. You've got harbours here, you've got hard to build on space there, you've got an infrastructure which is just incredibly woefully inadequate for the size that Auckland was in the 70s, let alone 40 years later, and nothing's been fixed. And I can see Wellington gearing up to not have the same problem. And what they're doing, and I know it's not all about Wellington, but hey, it is for me. Well, what they're doing is they're suggesting the idea of a super city down here, and everybody's going absolutely bonkers and saying, no way, we're not doing it. And the government's going, yeah, you wait, we'll get it. We'll make it happen. Because they have to, because they won't fix the big problems that Auckland hasn't fixed for 30 odd years. And they need to. They're going to have to do it. Anyway, sorry, rant over. Moving on.
So some key questions to ask about these LVR rule changes. Will LVR disparity between Auckland and the rest of New Zealand stimulate non-Auckland growth? It must do. There's got to be money pouring out into the regions, and of course you add the speed limit of the increase moving from 10 to 15% for non-complying loans out of Auckland. That's more money supply. If you can only if you have to put a 30% deposit in Auckland versus a 20% deposit on a fundamentally good market like Hamilton, Tauranga, Wellington, where you can get assets with a high cost base, which is my model. I think you need to be in an area with a high cost base with good fundamentals. Why wouldn't you go there? They're all cycling behind Auckland. Auckland's well and truly up. I think the contrarian investors and the counter-cyclical investors will start to see those areas as having value as we get a ripple effect out of Auckland, and the money supply is now better, encouraging that trend. So I think you'll see money pouring into the regions out of these rule changes. Will this create some buying opportunities in Auckland now that those with weaker equity levels have been taken out of the market? Possibly, but goodness, the circles I hang around in, everybody just uses cross-security to get 100% lending. So if you need a 30% deposit, you take that off your family home or the rest of your investment portfolio, and you then borrow 70% on the property, the rental property itself. So those with cross securities and other assets to borrow against will still get 100% lending. They'll just use 2 assets to achieve the 100%. So that will weaken to an extent the effect of the buying opportunities that would otherwise be there. But there must be less people in the market, must get less cluttered as a result of it in Auckland. Quick clip. Just bear in mind that this all comes in from the 1st of October. And one of the questions that I've had from a few clients is this going to be retrospective? Are they going to go backwards and apply the stuff in a backwards manner? David?
No, I think definitely not. I don't think any bank's going to want to front up to their client base and apply this retrospectively. I mean, banks will be making moves now to try and find ways of continuing their current lending growth. A massively competitive market, and they're going to want to lend. I think the real area of interest to everyone tuning in is the move by the Reserve Bank as part of these changes to introduce a new asset class for bank lending to residential property investors. So part of the release here was to instruct the banks to say, right, from October 1, you conduct some lending to a residential property investor, you've got to stick them in a certain class, and you've got to put more capital on your book. And they've got 9 months from October 1 to go back into their lending book and place the same lenders in the same asset class. So what it does is it will give everyone a label, a very clear one. You have X marked on your forehead. And if some of these changes don't soften things as well as the Reserve Bank will like, it will allow them to more easily implement further change.
Yeah, so you're talking about the capital adequacy ratios that are going to apply to the banks.
Yep.
And if they lend to a property investor, they have to hold more cash to make the bank shock-proof in the event of a global event that causes a shock to the credit markets globally.
Yeah, and it's likely they'll do that in one or two ways, potentially. I don't want folk to be overly wary around this, but if you've got to put more capital aside, then you're either going to raise interest rates in this area, or there'll be some sort of fee component for borrowing in this area, and that will help them keep their capital adequacy up.
Yes, and I don't think that's going to be a big deal, because if, let's say that they have to hold 5% more money in relation to their capital adequacy ratios, then you would have a 5% increase in the cost of funds. So if you have a 5% interest rate, 5% of 5% is 0.25%, so you have a 0.25% increase. So I don't think it's going to be a massive increase of interest rates, but there'll be some cost of credit passed on as a result of that, won't there?
Absolutely, but the cost of credit could also be passed on to other sectors and come in from other areas. Banks will be able to calculate what this might cost or what they might have to set aside, and they can get that from any area they like. It doesn't necessarily mean it's got to come from that new asset class.
Yep. Right, Steve, let's progress.
Sure. I've just got one quick question here that you might want to answer. Do we know what the actual percentage of capital gains tax will be? I'm being asked.
Yes. Yeah, good question. The capital gains tax is your marginal tax rate. So if you make a $100,000 gain inside the bright line test of 2 years, and you're already earning $100,000, so you're on the top marginal tax rate of 33%, then you'll pay 33% on that $100,000 capital gain.
So basically it just becomes taxable income and is treated the same way as any other income. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another way of looking at this bright line test is it's implying an intention to sell. And if you intend to sell property, of course it's taxable as business income, which is called at your ordinary tax rates. Mm-hmm. So if you're investing as a company, it would be 28%. If you're investing as a look-through company, it would be the marginal tax rate of the shareholder of the company, a trust at the trustee rate, etc., individuals at the individual rates. So moving on, I think a question that we should consider is, are we setting up for a reduction of the official cash rate? And if you look at the government, of course they want to reduce interest rates to help the rural sector and to help the regions. It's very much a two-speed economy, Auckland and Christchurch versus the rest of the country. But the government are stuck, because if they reduce the official cash rate to align us with the Australian reduction, to get our exchange rates down, to make us more competitive so we can get an exchange-led recovery and help the exporters and so forth, and create consumption stimulus, because if we're in a low inflation environment, if we reduce interest rates, there'll be more consumption, all of that, the government want to do that. But if they reduce interest rates in line with that, the Auckland housing market gets worse because you get a bigger yield gap between the income coming in and the cost of money going out. So it's very inflationary. So you could look at these LVR changes and these tax changes as the government sort of holding hands with the Reserve Bank saying, well, how can we reduce the official cash rate but not let Auckland go berserk? I know, let's limit money supply, keep the speed limit at 10%, increase the LVR ratio just for Auckland, and then we'll be able to reduce interest rates and give the exporters some relief without Auckland going berserk because we're strangling their money supply. So that's I think you could look at it like that. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I think there's a real indication now that the OCR could drop towards the end of the year, and these changes allow that option to take in place. Most economists now are suggesting that's definitely on the radar, and I think potentially it's a good thing because it will just even things up a bit.
Yeah, it will be a good thing for the regions.
Absolutely.
And for households that are paying high rents in Auckland. Now, what effect could this have on rents? This is interesting because I hear Andrew King and I hear Ollie Newland and a couple of other commentators saying that the LVR rule increases in Auckland will push rents up. And I don't get that. I disagree with that because rents are a function of supply and demand. You've got more people moving into an area than out of an area, or breeding into an area than out of an area. So you've got real demand as households form from population growth. And you've got tight supply for all the reasons we've been discussing. Now, when you have that, rents go up and house prices go up. When you change the money supply, what you're changing is the balance between who owns the houses and who rents the houses, not actually fiddling with supply. Because remember, new house builds already exempt these rules. So I don't think that this will have much impact on rents at all. At the end of the day, I've got a heap of houses in Auckland, and if you put interest rates up or down, I can't turn to my tenants and put their rents up or down. Obviously not going to go down, but the cost of the money doesn't get passed on to the tenant. Every rational landlord charges the market price, and interest rates fluctuating or supply of money through LVR rules fluctuating, you don't get to pass that on. So I don't think it has any impact on rents whatsoever. What's your view, Steve?
Oh, pretty much the exact opposite. I mean, as an investor, I expect to get some sort of return out of my capital investment. And if I buy a property and it's yielding, a good 7-8%, and that drops down to 5 or 6 because of government changes, I'm going to pass that on to my client as best I possibly can. I don't care what the market's doing.
Your yield is not changing because your yield is rent less operating expenses gives net yield as a percentage of cost. Interest doesn't even come into yield.
Yeah, I can see the official cash rate reducing for the next, maybe the next 8 or 10 months, and I can see that going down and that becoming, a cash cow for the stuff that I've got that's floating. But I think that an awful lot of the marketplace too has actually fixed their mortgages in the last 6-12 months based on historically low interest rates, and I think they're probably locked into that at the moment as well. So I don't think there's any lowering in the official cash rate is going to impact cash flow on the average investor too much.
Yeah, I think all of that is not quite on point because the question is, will change in the LVR affect rents?
Yeah, I suppose
to me, rents are a function of supply and demand. They're not a function of the LVR ratio. I don't see the connection.
Yeah, fair call. I mean, it over a period of time will actually create less tenants, I imagine, because less investors will buy properties or will have less properties in their portfolios as a whole. But that's going to take an awful long time.
Yeah.
It's going to have a long lead-in time for that.
That's changing the blend of who owns the houses versus who rents the houses. It's not changing the rents. But anyway, that's my view. I don't think it has any effect whatsoever.
Fair call.
Slide, please.
How do you feel about foreign ownership then? Because there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of weeks about foreign owners of properties, particularly in Auckland, coming in with money that they've borrowed at sort of 1% from their home countries, or cash. Do you think that that's something that the government's going to take aim at some stage?
Well, Well, first part of the question is what do I think of it? I think New Zealand's got the rules surrounding foreign ownership wrong. I'm absolutely disgusted that we sold the farm Lochinvar overseas. You know, the foreign capital that flows into this country is cheap. It's from very wealthy people, and we're becoming serfs in our own land in many respects. And maybe that's hysterical, but that's how I feel. If you look at it, Australia's ahead of New Zealand. The cities have gone through these big growth phases, and they've developed rules surrounding this stuff. And one rule that they have is you can't buy second-hand houses unless you're a Kiwi over there. So the Asian investors going into Australia have to buy new houses if they're going to buy property in Australia. And what that's doing is it's increasing the supply, because as they go into Australia, they've got to build a house if they want to own it. So they've got to buy new property off property developers. So that stimulates supply, and I think that's a smart move. So what do I think of I don't mind them owning houses in New Zealand. I really don't like them buying infrastructure and farms and that sort of thing, because you know, we're a country of 4 million people. Well, 4.4 million people. Well, there's 4.4 million multi-millionaires in China. You know, if you take 1% of China, they could buy New Zealand many times over. We will end up as serfs in our own land if we don't manage that. But in terms of the function within our economy, I don't mind them having houses when they migrate here and become part of our community and build businesses and function in New Zealand society, but not a big fan of foreign investors being able to buy second-hand houses and farms and infrastructure. I think that needs to be much more regulated.
Very cool.
So back onto finances. Are there ways around these rules? Well, non-bank lenders like ASAP Finance, and I know Dave's got a heap of MES funders that he uses, can supply can supply the 10 or 20 or 30% for the deposit, which gets you around the 30% LVR ratio. And so you end up paying. Away you go. Yep.
Yeah, sorry, mate. Also in that space, you know, what I would call a near bank lender and Resimac. They're a non-bank lender, so they're outside of the Reserve Bank rules. They'll do a straight 90% first mortgage prime rates. It's not that far off market, and that product's available now and will continue to be. So it becomes a definitive option for sure.
And non-bank lenders are not regulated by the Reserve Bank, so these LVR rules don't apply to them.
Yep.
So that they have securitised lending arrangements, don't they? So it's different to the money raised out of the...
Yeah, very much so. So they've been in New Zealand for just over a year now, in Australia for 28. A very good lender.
And I understand people like Harmony Finance, which raise money out of private individuals and lend them to private individuals, and Pepper Loans. These people are all in that space. They're coming into the market and are supplying money at much higher lending ratios. But of course, and as I discussed before, these split loan structures where you take 10 or 20% off your family home and you get the other 70 or 80% off the property itself means you get 100% funding by splitting the loans between two different banks. And that circumvents these rules pretty quickly. So let's talk now about the types of things that you should be doing before these rules come in. If you just advance, please, Steve. And you know, clearly split loan structures and getting refinanced as quickly as possible before the rules come in will be advantageous, because the property you want to lend against might be your existing rental portfolio. So if you want to get 80% in Auckland against your existing rental portfolio, so you can use that as a deposit on the next property that's going to have a 30% deposit on it, you're going to need to get that in place at 80% pretty much before August, when these rules start to kick in, or you'll get pegged back to 70% on your Auckland security. If you're out of Auckland, if you've got property out of Auckland with equity, that won't apply. Have you got any more tips, Dave?
Well, I think the trick to that is, because there is an art to extracting equity, and there's two elements. One is equity is extracted always as a loan, so the income piece comes in to the mix, and you can't forget about that. You just can't rock up to the bank and say, I want to get my equity out. You've got to have the affordability, And the second is finding a strong enough purpose for the lending. So you've got a situation where you might find you're looking to gear up on your existing portfolio just to get to 80%, and then but you may not have a strong enough purpose, as in you may not have a property that you wish to buy. Pre-approvals have an expiry date. So there's a real art to trying to get that flexi facility out of your equity, and certainly working with a good advisor should help you do that, because it is the option. You've got to, if you're going to carry on your way acquiring property, then it's going to pay to gear up now.
Yeah, I mean, the banks want to lend you the money, don't they? They want to lend the money.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And it's very competitive out there. But with these rules coming in, it's going to get harder from August onwards. So particularly if you've got your security in Auckland, you can beat these rules coming in if you're quick. And so now's the time to go see somebody that's competent with investment finance like Dave Windler and get this stuff done. Just bring the slide up, please, Steve. So we talked about this, just another couple of clicks, I think. We talked about these capital adequacy ratios, so I won't delve into this too deeply, other than to say the Reserve Bank has more powder that it can fire. They can require banks to hold more cash to make the market more shockproof against a credit meltdown in Europe or the States, global financial crisis too. But from what I can see of that, it's not going to be a massive shock on the market. It might be, 0.25% increase or 0.5% increase in interest rates, worst case scenario, and if anything, a lot less than that. So with so much noise around, that does scare the market, but I don't see this as being a terribly frightening process. I'd be more concerned that they make the LVR in Auckland 60 or 50% for investors. That would be much more, of concern. This stuff is, I think, less of a concern. And that's that piece David was talking to before about wanting to classify investors in the 9 months after these rules coming in October, because the RB definitely wants to start to implement a premium on the banks by pushing these capital adequacy ratios on property investors. Now let's look at the effective leverage in the next slide on, if you're investing with an 80% LVR and you've got 100,000, the bank will lend you 400, so that's 500,000 total investment. And let's say over some time series, 12, 15 years, doesn't matter what it is, the asset doubles in value. And I'll just pause there and say, when people tell you property doubles in 7 years, that's nonsense. It doesn't. Some property will, but on average it's more like 10 to 13 years, certainly in the Auckland market. And there will be examples of it doubling in certain time series between the bottom of the GFC, for example, to now. But if you go peak to peak, it's slower than that. It's 10 to 12 years. So let's say you've got 500,000 invested, 100,000 deposit, and over 12 years the 500,000 doubles to $1 million. So you make 500,000 growth. Well, of course, that's 500% growth on 100,000 when you look at the growth of 500 over the deposit of 100, and you turn your 100,000 into 600,000, which is 6-to-1 return. And if you just had 100,000 invested, it would have doubled to 2. You would have got 200%. So you're comparing 200% to 600%. And that's the benefit of leverage. There's an incremental benefit of 400,000 on that example. So what happens when you take the LVR down to 70%? Let's look at that. Same numbers, same growth rate, same time series, same 100,000 deposit. You end up with 433,000 versus 200,000, and the incremental benefit is 233. So in the prior slide, 80% leverage on 100 grand gives you 400,000 growth. 400,000 incremental benefit over unleveraged investing. At 70%, it's 233. So that is case in point. It's going to push people out into the regions, into places like Wellington, Christchurch, Tauranga, Hamilton, the better centres, where you can get 80% and 15% or more non-compliant lending. So Steve, that's good news for Wellington.
It's all seeming like good news for Wellington, to be fair.
What about the earthquakes?
Oh, look, come on. Everybody's got their little problems.
Yeah, because I've also read recently, Dave, you might be interested in this, that they're changing the earthquake zoning in Auckland, or the earthquake requirements for initial evaluation reports on commercial property, particularly in old heritage properties, for a 35-year timeframe expectation. So where it's going to have to come in the next 15 to 20 years in areas south of Wellington and surrounding Wellington down towards Christchurch. I understand it's going to remain at 15 to 20 years. Auckland, they're saying, well, it's not really a quake zone, so it's going to be a 35-year expectation, which is going to relax the leverage available on commercial properties up here.
Yeah, hopefully make it a little easier, and certainly it's a requirement in that commercial lending space to get that earthquake rating, and if it's not high enough, banks are not currently lending, but hopefully they'll make some adjustments on the back of this.
Doesn't affect residential, of course, but
no.
Good news for commercial stuff up here. Now I think it's time for Q&A.
Yeah, let's hit some Q&A. Eh? Let's have a look at some questions here. All right, I've got one here. Where are we? Is it best to rejig your property companies or LTCs to other minority shareholders, or non-worker family for minority income earners?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, complicated question to throw at you. But
I mean, so you've got to look through company. You're the predominant owner of the company. If you're making a loss, you want the loss to flow to the person with the highest marginal tax rate exposure. If you're making a profit, you want to push it to the taxpayer with the lowest marginal tax rate exposure. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, with look-through companies, they're taxed transparently. If you've got 10% of them, you get 10% of the loss of the profit. And if you start moving the shares around to try and get a tax advantage, that's tax avoidance. So you've really got to get it right at the beginning, or have a very good reason other than tax to change the shareholding.
Yep.
And it's very much positioned on whether the company's making a profit or a loss, and who you're trying to get that profit or loss to based on their employment position or income position.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question then. Question on capital gains. In this scenario, these people are building, say, 6 apartments. They're living in the top floors. Intention is to hold all apartments. If circumstances happen to change and they were forced to sell one apartment, would capital gains tax apply? And if so, what's it based on? Sale price less cost to build or other costs?
So the devil will be in the detail. I assume that you're talking about a property purchased after the 1st of October, because if it's purchased prior to the 1st of October, these rules don't apply, so that gives you relief straight away, probably ends your concern straight away. But let's say you bought a property after the 1st of October 2015 and you sold it within 2 years. It's an investment property, it's not an inheritance, it's not subject to a relationship property settlement, it's not a family home, so you don't get any of the exemptions. Doesn't matter what your intention was, what was in your mind, it's taxable if you sell it within 2 years. And how will the tax be calculated? It'll be your, to be totally honest, I haven't seen the legislation, so I can't answer that accurately, but it'll be your cost, selling price minus cost. And the question is, will they allow us to have things like real estate fees, as you do in Australia, as an implied cost? I would imagine they would, but I haven't seen the detail yet. So it's fair that if they're going to tax it as a revenue gain with an intention test, that you, with a deemed intention to sell test, it follows that they would give you all of the deductions that you would get if you were intending to sell. So you should get your real estate fees, you should get your any cost incurred in the furtherance of acquiring that property to resale, sell it.
Very cool.
So everything, yeah.
And these new changes, we're expecting them to cover all asset classes, meaning commercial property, bare land, everything?
residential property, isn't it? So, is it all property? It's a good question. Yeah, it's all. I think it's all property bought and sold after the 1st of October, and it's got to fit into an exemption of home inheritance or relationship property split to get out of it.
Yeah. Do you think everybody's going to run out and try and buy something before the 1st of October? Do you think there's going to be a short-term run on real estate to bypass the introduction of the rules?
Must be. LVR rules don't come in until August, and you know, but most of the market's not informed. But the informed part of the market will be leaping out of their seats to get in, I'm sure.
So many
we've spiked. Yeah, we've spiked in activity right now. We're busy, flat out.
Yep.
And a lot of it's around extracting equity in existing property.
Which is smart. That's exactly what you should be doing.
I reckon.
So, do you think that there'll be a lag where things will slow off for 2 years, and then 2 years and 1 day's time, everybody's going to sell again? It's not really going to help them, is it? Because it's going to be the intention rule from there on in, isn't it?
I think there'll be anti-avoidance provisions surrounding that. So if you sell in 2 years and 1 day's time, they'll pick you up anyway.
Yep.
So it'll just be business as usual after 2 years. I don't think there'll be a big flood. I suppose there could be. It's a good question.
You're getting a lot of questions coming in now that are bordering on avoidance. Realistically, a lot of people saying, you know, how do we get around this? How do we not have to pay the tax?
Oh, easy. Just hold the property for 10 years and get rich and don't pay tax.
Yeah, exactly.
Easier. Yeah, and let's just go sideways on that. A lot of my clients come in, they want to trade property, or they want to develop property, or spec build property. And you know, let's say that you're going to make $70,000 as a trade. You buy a property for $300,000, you fully renovated, and you sell it for $370,000. Well, you're going to pay your real estate agents, if you sell through an agent, 3% on $370,000. Let's call that 10 grand plus GST. So 70 grand turns to 60. You're then going to pay GST on the 60, which will be, let's call that 3, 6, and 18. Let's call that 12 grand. So 60 becomes 48. You're then going to pay 33% on the 48. So 48 less a third, 16 grand. You're now down to 32. So you turn 70 grand into 32 grand by selling. So whether you developed it, spec built it, or traded it to get that 70 grand, you turn 70 into 32. But if you simply hold the property, you know, you keep the whole 70, and if you can make it cash flow itself and hold it for 10 years, then you'll have 370 plus 6% times 10 years, another couple of $100 grand. So you end up with the 70 that you got at the beginning, plus the couple of $100 in capital growth, you get 270. And it's not taxable because develop to hold or purchase price discounts with long-term intention or build to hold, all of that is exempt. Subdivision to hold, it's all exempt if you have long-term intention. I don't know how long these rules are going to be around for, but it's fantastic. Take advantage of that.
Yeah, but to be fair, those people that were going to trade the property and bought it with the intention of trading it, the amount of tax that they are liable to pay hasn't changed. This isn't a new tax. This is just enforcing the current rules, isn't it? So if you purchase the property with the intention to trade it to make cash flow, you're not actually paying any additional cash in taxes.
Yeah, in relation to the bright line test and the changes to the taxes, that's not relevant to this discussion. See, Steve, I look at what you do and I think, what a brilliant skill. Learn to buy a property at a massive discount, manufacture your own, manufacture the deposit for the next property because you can deposit recycle, and create positive cash flow by dealing in niches where you do get positive cash flow above the cost of funds, so the properties are paying you. But you can use that skill two ways. Now, I do appreciate that some people need to trade to make money, and I respect that. But the people that can afford to, that could keep the property, I just think it's so much more powerful if you use that same skill base to hold the property.
Oh, so do I. I disagree. Hmm.
Because using those numbers that I just used, the $70,000 margin on the $370,000 property turns into $32,000 after tax and after selling costs, rough numbers. But if you held the $370,000 property for 10 years, you'd have $270,000. It's sort of 8 or 9 to 1, buy and hold versus trade on the same property. So you could do 1/8 of the work, but you have to wait 8 years to get there.
Yeah,
So
I don't disagree with that, but Matthew, not all of us are trying to buy and hold in what has turned into a fairly rampant Auckland property market. And a lot of the people outside of Auckland and a lot of my clients use the income created from the trading to be the serviceable income that they can use to prove that they can hold properties. And the beautiful part about that is you get to see so many pieces of real estate and see so many houses, and then you get to pick and choose which ones you actually want to keep. And that self-perpetuates. It creates the income required so that we can go to Mr. Dave Windler there and say, here's my income. I'm pretty good at it. I've earned myself 150 grand trading properties in the last 12 months. And there's my $150,000 annual income. Now please go and show that to the bank so that I can hold a few properties long term. And then hopefully you can buy something for $400, prove that it's worth $520,000 through a bit of renovation, and borrow 80% against it and get all of your money back out again. But if you keep doing that and only do that and don't have, a large accounting firm or a property coaching firm or a mortgage broking firm to prove your income, you often come up against the cash flow issues. Isn't that right, Mr. Windler?
Yep, certainly. I mean, I think for a lot of the clients we have who trade, it's about generating cash flow for income that they need because they don't have it, or they've decided actually they want to get out of the job that they've got, and then they've got to go on that journey of putting those numbers through a set of accounts so that they can go full circle and go back to the banks again and then hold. At least when you're trading, you've got lending options outside of the banks because the lending can be a little bit more expensive, but that's okay because it's short term.
In addition to that, you've got to be able to feed the cat too.
I'm not knocking the skill base. I'm quite the opposite. I'm just saying what is a very powerful thing, which is the ability to trade property and make money, can be even more powerful if you can afford to instead hold it. And I say to traders, hey, go ahead and trade, but make sure you're disciplined and you keep the good ones because
absolutely do a little bit of both.
And that's where rules like buy to hold to buy to sell come in. Trade to hold one, trade to hold one. Don't affect to hold one.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, look, we've spent an hour and a half on this subject tonight already. Where can everybody get hold of yourself, Matt, and yourself, Mr. Dave Windler, to get further instruction on this? I know that there's probably people that want to get in touch with you, Matt, at GRA. Just gra.co.nz. Jump on the website and have a chat to you guys.
Dub at the front. That's perfect. Thank you.
Super duper. Dave Windler, Mortgage Supply Company. If I imagine there's probably a few people looking at this and going, okay, well, this is a even better reason to get in front of their broker at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. By all means, just hop on our website, find me there. You can just slip through an email to me, and I'll certainly respond to that and see what we can do to help you out.
Superb. All right.
And I'd just like to give David a bit of a plug here and say it's so important to get a mortgage broker who's familiar with investment finance. So many brokers out there are home finance specialists, and they try and stretch into the investment finance side of things, and they frankly underwhelm their clients when it comes to doing things like split loan structures, or just trying, for example, to choose the right bank for the investor profile, because a lot of banks will say no, but an experienced investment financier like David will know which bank will suit you, and therefore you get a much better chance of getting your loan approved. So my clients speak very highly of you, Dave, and
cheers, man. Appreciate that.
Keep up the good work.
You're just somebody proficient and up to speed with the rules enough to be on a webinar like this tonight and be offering the service. Most mortgage brokers, I think, have their head in the sand a little bit about what these rules are going to do and how they affect, And so, what are you two lovely gentlemen doing this weekend at all?
Taking a plane to Wellington, like most investors could consider doing, I think.
Do you like that segue? Do you like that?
That's a good segue.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you.
I'm lucky enough to be having my Property Masters event in Wellington this weekend, for anybody that doesn't know. And we've got both Matt Gilligan and Dave Windler coming down and presenting and speaking for us in Wellington on Sunday. And I've actually sorted out an allocation of tickets for the GRA database through Matt Gilligan. He's actually paid me actual real money for these tickets. I've given him 10 of them. How do you want to do this, Matt? Do you just want to offer them to the first 10 people to email me at that email address?
Yep, that's fine.
Magic.
Just know.
All right, if you really would like a free ticket to our event, it's one of the last tickets available. We've got well over 300 people booked for this event. Just fire me an email quickly through to stephen@stephengoody.com. I will take the first 10 people. They're double tickets, so you can bring your partner or business partner along. And it's on Sunday at the Intercontinental Hotel. Be great to see you, and you can meet Matt Gilligan and Dave Windler as well, shake their hands, say g'day, and just fire us through an email saying, I'd like to grab one of those free tickets, please, if you would like. Just make sure that you can come on Sunday, because I don't want to allocate these tickets that I've set aside for Matthew without having somebody actually turn up on the day. That would be magic. All right. Well, look, thank you very much, gentlemen.
I hope to see all my Wellington clients there. So do come up and say hello. And just Steve, I think you're in the box seat in the next 6 to 12 months. You're going to have all this LVR money flowing down to your market. So you've got good yields. Wellington's good bet at the moment. Just stick to the assets with a high cost base. And
I agree.
Should be looking good. So we'll see you on Sunday. Look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much, guys.
Pleasure, Stephen, and thanks everyone for attending tonight.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks particularly, Matt, for putting this together and recommending it and putting most of the comment in. It's nice of you to let Dave and I get a word in here and there, but most of, well, to be fair, you brought most of the knowledge here, and I really appreciate it. You are most definitely the expert in this field, and we appreciate you bringing it to everybody's attention on our databases. Fantastic.
You guys both know what you're doing.
Fabulous. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks again, everybody. Thank you. Good night and bye.